Wow. I mean, come on. That is like it right there. The holiday, I have to say. Oh, thank you to our teen choir. Well, tonight, how amazing to be able to celebrate the birthday of the world, which is 5,778 years old. Give or take a few billion years. Even Mother Earth, she's a little sensitive about her age. Now, when we think about the birth of the world, most of us recall the creation story found in Genesis. First, God creates the celestial lights. Creatures are living together in harmony. Adam and Eve are living in a Garden of Eden. God creates a world of perfection. But soon enough, there is trouble in paradise. And fast forwarding past the serpent and the forbidden fruit and the sudden shame in their nakedness, the human beings find themselves kicked out of the garden. And we spend the rest of our lives trying to get back to where we began, to Gan Eden, which was paradise. In my experience, however, this creation narrative doesn't ring exactly true. Every creation project that I've ever been a part of, from childbirth to home renovations to writing high holiday sermons, it's a lot messier than that. And if we have to measure ourselves against an original state of perfection, we would never escape our own deficiencies or inadequacies. We would live lives of apology for all that we are not, and anger for all that we've lost, now that we're no longer in Eden. But Kabbalah, our Jewish mystical tradition, offers a very different creation narrative, one that acknowledges the very impossibility of perfection. In the beginning, God's presence filled the universe. Because God was everywhere, there was not room for anything else. So God had to contract like a deep inhale in order to make space in which to create the world. The mystics called this divine contraction Tzimtzum. And in that newfound space, God creates darkness. God then pours a stream of divine light into 10 vessels, but these vessels are not able to withstand this awesome primordial energy, and so they shatter. Holy sparks everywhere. Human beings, we were created to find the splinters of divine light and to make a tikkun, a repair, by helping God gather them together, to lift up the broken pieces, and to restore and recreate the world. What a strange, chaotic, and beautiful narrative that our mystical tradition has given us. One that acknowledges without apology today's imperfect world. One that asserts that brokenness and not perfection is actually our true inheritance. With this story of creation as our guide, our task is not to search in vain for some lost paradise, but rather to seek out sparks, tiny sparks of light that is in the divine debris all around us, to find holiness in the broken and imperfect. Now, I thought of this creation story when I was reading recently about Usain Bolt, the fastest human being in the history of the world, the record holder in both the 100 and the 200 meters, and the only person to win both events in 3 consecutive Olympics. Watching him run is an electrifying experience. He's almost superhuman. Scientists, of course, have studied his running in an effort to understand how Bolt could be so darn fast. They found something completely unexpected. His stride is dramatically uneven. His left foot stays on the ground 14% longer than his right. Now, conventional science asserts that an uneven stride slows a runner down. And what's more, Bolt's irregularity comes from a fundamentally unbalanced body. You see, severe scoliosis has curved his spine and made his right leg a half an inch shorter than his left. Scientists are left scratching their heads. Could it be that his imperfect body is the secret to his supernatural speed? Many of the greatest artists and musicians and thinkers of all time had something materially flawed about them. Beethoven wrote his finest symphonies while he was going deaf. Virginia Woolf expanded our conception of literature, and Vincent van Gogh our way of seeing color in the world, while they both struggled deeply with mental illness. Stephen Hawking is confined to a wheelchair and has to use computer-assisted speech to help the rest of us understand what he knows are the secrets of the universe. But the mystical story of creation would say that their genius does not come necessarily despite their handicap or their imperfection or their disability or their pain. It actually comes precisely from those broken shards where the divine spark resides. The Kabbalists would say, every one of us is an unfinished vessel. Too often we see our growing edges as deficiencies, weaknesses, vulnerabilities. But what if the cracks in our lives are what enable us to see our light? A simple folktale relates this mystical idea with a beautiful image. A water carrier had 2 large pots, and each of them hung on the end of a pole which he carried across his neck. One of the pots was perfect and sound, while the other pot was cracked and leaked, arriving only half full at the end of the long walk from the stream to his master's house. For a full 2 years, this went on daily, and the perfect pot was naturally quite proud of itself for its superior water-carrying abilities. But the leaking pot felt miserable and dejected, and one day, by the stream, it spoke to the water carrier. "I'm ashamed of myself, and I want to apologize to you." "Why?" asked the water barrier. "What are you ashamed of?" "Look at me. I'm defective," the pot said. "I have one job, but because of this crack on my side, I'm only able to deliver half my load at best." The water bearer smiled and said, "As we return to the master's house, I want to show you something." And he pointed to the well-worn path that they took each day, and for the first time, the pot stopped looking inward and instead looked outside itself. Only then did the pot notice a ribbon of color edging his side of the path. "I've always known you leaked," said the water carrier, "so I planted seeds underneath you, and thanks to you, these flowers have been nourished to full bloom." This story is a great analogy for the role of any rabbi, of any teacher, mentor, or parent. It teaches us to recognize what is sacred about every one of God's creatures with all of our cracks, and to know how and where to plant the right seeds. Had the water carrier only seen the pot's purpose as carrying water up a hill, well, it would always feel deficient, and it would never understand that perhaps it had a whole other reason for being, that its brokenness could actually bring a very different kind of beauty into the world. Those of us who are parents often worry or lament our children's cracked places. But what if we could accept and love the differences of every child and find a way to nourish what is unique, to understand that perhaps they have a different aspiration than what we had originally planned? Two of my greatest models for this outlook are Mitch, Rubin, and Audra Zuckerman, members of this congregation who, along with their son Max, gave me their blessing to share their story. Max, now 18, was born with Down syndrome. And the best way to describe Max is a force of love. Max started coming to services before his bar mitzvah, and he would sing joyously and unabashedly. Tonight, you got to hear him as part of our teen choir. Max had a viral internet moment several years ago when he was watching his beloved Mets play in a Subway Series game. He was sitting nice and close to the field, and as David Wright walked up to the plate, Max called out, "Hit a home run!" in the way that only Max could do. Well, Wright did exactly that, and the team won the game. After Wright circled the bases, he trotted over to Max's seat to thank him for the encouragement. But what made the video so popular was that Max wasn't just going to go for a high five. He went in for the hug, like a signature Max Rubin bear hug. And then he ruffled David Wright's hair. Now, captured in that exchange was not only Max's emphatic excitement and affection, but the purity of his human connection, without self-consciousness of whether or not it was his place to give an attaboy to a superstar like that. Mitch explained to me that an adjustment was necessary when Max first entered their lives. Max was born, and he had this extra chromosome, and it changed everything. It was not what we expected. We had some preconceived ideas about who our child was going to be, and at first we mourned that that was not going to be our child. But once we saw what we got and embraced how unbelievably amazing it is, things opened up. True humanity and passion and love come from the ability to live with what you get, not with what you thought you were going to get. And we are better parents, better life partners, better people because of Max. Down syndrome does not always make things easy for Max, but he will be the first to tell you, I have this extra chromosome, and that's what makes me awesome. In his best-selling book, Far from the Tree, Andrew Solomon quotes writer Clara Claiborne Park about her experience of raising a severely autistic daughter. I write now what 15 years past I would still not have thought possible to write. That if today I were given the choice to accept the experience with everything that it entails, or to refuse the bitter largesse, I would have to stretch out my hands, because out of it has come, for all of us, an unimagined life. And I will still not change the last word of the story. It is still love. These remarkable parents, and many others in our congregation who inspire me, they found the divine spark in their child and nourished it. They've helped teach me that the world is more beautiful because we are all varied and surprising and imperfect. This is a theological vision. God doesn't make mistakes. Sometimes Our brokenness comes suddenly, shattering the careful balance that we make of our lives. We lose a loved one. We receive a diagnosis. We lose a job. We discover an infidelity. We take a fall. The loss of what we once had devastates us and can make us feel angry and abandoned or alone. It takes an act of will, of courage, to grow from loss. But we read in the Psalms, Karov Adonai lemishberei lev. God is close to the brokenhearted. The pain of loss can invite us to call for God or community in very unexpected ways. There are many leaders in our congregation who shared with me that their involvement in Central came directly out of the loss of a parent or a child or an illness. And sometimes that sense of closeness to God came through the sacred kindness of another person, the friend who accompanied you to chemo treatments, the sibling who apologized to you as you buried a parent together, the neighbor who quietly brought you meals after your loss. Rabbi Menachem Mendel of Kotz, an 18th century Hasidic rabbi, wrote, Ein devar shalem yoter malev shavur. There is nothing more whole than a broken heart. Most of us don't feel whole in our brokenheartedness. We feel inadequacy, sadness, or even shame. Unfortunately, we live in a world in which we are encouraged to keep our broken edges hidden. Mental illness, financial worries, addiction, family strife. We endure all of this in the shadows. We even speak of death in euphemisms. He passed. Or she is at rest, as if death were just an extended nap time. We've been taught to avoid facing the pain of life straight on. And sometimes we do find the courage to accept our broken pieces, only to find that our loved ones cannot, which can sometimes make us feel even more alone. Most of us would just rather caulk up those cracks, get busy, and try to move forward without addressing the heartache. I know that I'm guilty of doing that myself. I feel like I have to. I feel so responsible for so many people. My 3 children, my husband, my aging parents, and of course, the Jewish people. It's a lot. I find that I'll often deny or dismiss or just ignore the cracks I feel in my own life because I feel I can't ever afford to be broken. But looking back on my life, I know that my essential character, my very identity, has been most shaped in my darker chapters. In the weight of postpartum depression as a new mom, in the sting of rejection, being repeatedly told that I'm not a real Jew as a product of intermarriage, or the sadness and the guilt of living 3,000 miles away from my parents, especially as they get older. I would not have chosen these painful moments, but without them, I know I would not be the human being that I am. In covering up our cracks, avoiding what feels painful, papering over our losses, ignoring our broken relationships, we miss an essential part of our humanity. We cannot be whole. Many have said that religion's goal is to comfort the afflicted and then afflict the comfortable. I would put it somewhat differently, though. I think Judaism's goal is to make whole what is broken and to break what feels whole. I mean, what other tradition would ask us on what is supposed to be the most perfect, joyous day of our life, our wedding day, to end it by breaking a glass? Moses never discards the broken fragments of the first set of tablets that he smashes, but instead carries them, the full weight of them, alongside the finished pair in the Mishkan, the portable tabernacle, because the ark cannot be complete without both sets. Make whole what is broken and break what feels whole. And during these high holy days, I'd say all the more so. At this point, I know there's some of you out there sitting thinking, that's nice, Rabbi, but I'm feeling okay. I don't have any complaints. I'm not broken. Now, if you've come here tonight on Rosh Hashanah and you feel you have nothing to examine, no wound in your life to heal, no relationship to repair, well, then I hope you will listen especially closely to the shofar. Rosh Hashanah is also known as Yom Teruah, the day of the sounding of the shofar. And the purpose of that shofar blast is to shake us up, to disturb our status quo. The shofar call, shvarim, literally means broken. And if you do not feel any cracks emerge from that sonic signal, you might ask yourself if you've truly fulfilled your obligation to hear it. For that shofar blast should be a wake-up call, to remind us to dig a little deeper, to bear into what is hard, to stop living life on the surface of it all, to return to our fractured relationships, to lean into the grief we're feeling for someone we lost, to examine our imperfections that we constantly criticize, and then maybe to get curious. Perhaps that pain, that flaw, that broken heart has a purpose. On Rosh Hashanah, in this new year, let go of that mythical creation story of the Garden of Eden with its perfect paradise. Instead, embrace the messier, mystical story of creation where divine sparks of God's light are scattered everywhere in our fragmented universe. That brokenness is all around us and inside each one of us. Unearth its meaning. Confront its terrible beauty. And you may discover that the true divinity is found in that broken shard that cut us in the first place. God has given us a sacred task, an opportunity to make our own tikkun. But in the coming year, instead of trying to make our broken parts whole, may you find in them what is holy.